Join us in a festival that promises to be extraordinary because Bali is extraordinary.
So, hi everyone, welcome to Ubud Writers and Readers Festival 2021. This year, the festival returns with the theme of Mulat Srarira, self-reflection, which is drawn from a Balinese Hindu philosophy. From 8th to 17th the meaning of self-reflection, cultural introspection, and human rights, examining who we are, what unites and divides us, and what drives our actions. So I'm your moderator, Sebastian Partogi, and then today I have the pleasure of introducing our speaker, Stephanie Turvey. So let me just introduce her. Uh, Stephanie Turvey, lives in South Australia. Her interests include cultivating sustainable and simple lifestyles, maintaining well-being, reconnecting with nature and the local landscape, and rekindling a love for the written and expressive word, among many other spiritual, societal, intercultural, and community-minded pursuits. Stephanie enjoys connecting with like-minded individuals to share conversion and build community. So welcome, Stephanie. We're so happy to meet you here in the Ubud Riders Festival through our virtual event. And of course,
Thank you.
this event, we will see the launching of Stephanie's latest book. It's called The Wellbeing Revolution, Reclaiming Our Wellbeing. Um, so, to start our discussion, I will ask Stephanie to read a
Mhm.
passage from the book just to give you
Yeah.
a gist of what it's about. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Sebastian, for your welcome. And I'll just show you the book. The Wellbeing Revolution. Yeah. So join me as we read through. We're going to look at chapter 5 to start with. And the chapter name is The Power of the Human Spirit. As we listen to our body and our inner voice, we will begin to grow in insight, and this will lead to wisdom, guidance, and revelation in our lives. We will be inspired from within, and, and this will give us the energy and courage we need to pursue our healing and restoration. I am referring to the capacity to grow in spiritual wisdom and revelation. I am not referring to any philosophy or religion. This wisdom comes from within, and we were born with the ability to listen, receive, and live it. Though we each have the potential to grow, it is not automatic. Therefore, it is necessary to cultivate the skills and awareness in this area of our lives. At times, our personal experiences can become life lessons as we reflect on our behavior and decisions and the impact that is felt in our lives. We are going to look at how growth happens when we make an intentional choice rather than be passive. We're going to explore what it means to be proactive and to take initiative, to challenge our attitudes so we can influence the outcome for ourselves. Often we make the mistake of ignoring the inner voice that seeks to guide us in the right way of living. We rush in and we don't see the risks involved. We don't take the time to explore all the options or to seek the advice of trusted others, and we regret our decision. No one is a failure, and each have a purpose. Our wisdom does not depend on our level of intelligence or knowledge or experience. We can grow no matter what background we come from, and we can be of any age. We do not need to be an expert, a professional, or have social status to grow in wisdom. We are uniquely designed as a combination of body, soul, and spirit. We tap into this wisdom that is creative and empowering and is part of the real self. We will be exploring more of who we really are and how to grow that potential. The path to know thyself is a worthy one, and it is an adventure of its own and a lifelong process. The road to healing and recovering can mean we need to walk on the narrow road so we can enjoy life and avoid being diverted and distracted by things on the wide road which are not so good for us at this time. Whether we choose safety or adventure and leave the known for the unknown will impact our lives as we prepare to begin the journey of discovery. The path that lies ahead of us will beckon us on as we explore our potential. We open ourselves to these fundamental questions as we move forward in the healing journey. We will learn to discern between the narrow and the wide road and what it takes to choose to walk the narrow road towards healing and recovery.
Okay, so thank you. And actually, like, I was also reading that book yesterday to prepare for this session. It was such a timely moment for me also because, as like so many of us, I'm also experiencing hardships due to the unexpected things which happened during the pandemic.
Yeah.
I just lost a job unfortunately, and then all the other things that are always going on within the
Yeah.
last 1.5 year. So like your book really resonates with me. But then obviously I remember it was published in 2019, right? So before
Yeah.
the pandemic was around.
Exactly.
So, but
Yeah.
I want to ask you actually, like, what was the driving force of the book, and then what was your creative process? But then, I'm particularly interested in the driving force for you in writing the book. Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you for allowing me to read part of the book. The inspiration behind the book was my own personal journey that I had faced my own personal crisis. I had a medical condition which affected my mental health and my physical health, and so I went looking for answers, and in some ways I didn't find the answers that I needed, and so I began a journey of my own healing. I began my own healing journey, and that was in around about 2014, and it was a couple of years later in early 2018 that I think I reached a life turning point where I remembered a dream I had when I was a child, and that was to write a book. I wanted to be an author and write a book. And as a young person, I remember really thinking very strongly about, helping people with, mental illness. And so when I decided to write the book, it wasn't long before I decided, well, it would be about well-being, because that was part of my, life experience. It was part of my family. It was, it was something that impacted me, and even through my life, even to this point, until today, it's been a journey around, mental health and well-being. But I also have a love of, English words, a love of, using words and communicating words, and even helping other people to learn to communicate the inner world. And I really think that in our lives, there's a lot of focus on, behavior and activity and doing things, but we can't always express what's happening inside. There's not always a language to talk about what's going on inside. And like you were saying, when you lose a job or you lose a relationship, you lose your health, how do we communicate these the real experiences that we go through? And so I really wanted to use my love of words and also my interest in well-being to start to generate that communication and conversation in the community, and hopefully help other people to start talking about their own experience as well. And part of the creative process was that during this time, 2018, I used to take a walk down by the river, and it was a beautiful place, and that's where the ideas would come for the book. And I'd take a notepad with me and I'd write down the notes of all the ideas that would come up, and I would take them home and type up on the computer. And gradually the body of the book developed, and I became more confident, and I learned how to do the chapters. And so it was a very creative process, but part of that was listening to my inner voice, the inner process, because I couldn't just do it with my head. It had to be the head and the heart. And I think that's another sort of learning curve for our society, is to learning to listen to the head and the heart together. Not just the head, not just trying to think things through with our head, but also really connecting with our heart, because our heart can speak to us and teach us things that just just the mind on its own is not enough, I don't think. Yeah, so that's part of the creative process.
And I would like to ask you also, drawing from your own personal experience, because I think you also mentioned in the book, like listening to our inner voice. It's not that easy, right? Because it can be disruptive. And then, of course, like during this time, there's a lot of grief, there's a lot of sadness. And then, of course, there's a lot of shame and stigma also surrounding mental health issues. So it's by no means an easy process, right? Like we'd rather distract ourselves rather than just sit with the grief or the sorrow. So can you share like how your experience, and maybe like can help us through your own experience on how to, first of all, like be into tune with our inner voice, but then secondly, like expressing them through words. So like it's a two-pronged question.
I think to be able to communicate what we're feeling to other people is a huge challenge. But I suppose one of the focus of the book is what we can do to actually start to look at what's happening internally, so that we can build ourselves up and regain our sort of our confidence and our sense of well-being. So I have actually made a few notes about this, which I'll just try and find. Yeah, so when we even talk about, mental health or mental illness, what does it mean? And generally it's with some discomfort somewhere. We're feeling discomfort, we're feeling, whatever it is, stress or pain. And we may be getting sort of certain thoughts, mental thoughts and images coming in. And often we will try and distract ourselves, like you just mentioned. We will sort of run away. We'll try and be busy. We will, find things to do to avoid looking inside, because it can be quite confronting. But this is what I think is important, and especially even teaching children even, is allowing ourselves to feel some of these sensations and even images. So, and learning to sort of you could say detach from them, but without completely sort of suppressing them. So we don't want to suppress everything, and we do need some regulation, but in a way that we can manage. And I in my book I refer to this inner you could say conflict, where we have a sense of distress or fear even. I liken it, or I give an example of the radio station. On, you're driving in the car and you've got the radio on, and there's a frequency, so you can change the channel from one to another. You might like a different music style, so you change the channel. And it's that's like our mind. Our mind is like the radio. There's constant noise in our minds, and constant chatter, and so much going on, and sometimes it can be overwhelming. And so we can find a way to sort of step back a little, give ourselves some space to sort of monitor what's going on. But we can also, through being detached, we can lessen the sense of distress. So we can allow the sensations, but we can practice deep breathing, or we can even practice, some sort of gentle movement, or, some sort of meditation practice even, which allows us to have some distance to, decrease the overwhelm. But so we're still connecting in with with ourselves, the deep part of ourselves, and not just being controlled by, the anxiety or the depression or whatever that is. So I hope that makes sense. So in my notes, I've said we can build resilience by recognizing the messages from the mind, the mental messages, but by being willing to hear the messages or see the messages, and even to experience the sensations, but to become detached from them, and to be able to change the frequency so that they're not so overwhelming. Now, so we're not wanting to completely shut those sensations down, but we're wanting to actually wrestle with the fear, because it's the fear that we're wanting to avoid. We're wanting to avoid at all costs. But there's times in our lives we do need to confront the fearful things, the pain, the suffering, the loss, and I have heard it said that the other side of anxiety is excitement. So although we're feeling anxious, if we can sort of push through the anxious thoughts and the representing physical sensations, as we get through, we will actually start to feel some sort of a release, a sense of excitement, because, and that's the work we've done. And so it's important to do this inner work so that we can actually, build confidence that there are more emotions there than just, anxiety and stress or fear. There's, excitement, there's joy, there's hopefulness, there's, satisfaction, or there's contentment. There are so many other feelings, but, we can get locked into only very limited feelings. And that's why in the book, I advocate, less medications and more natural interventions, because otherwise we're going to miss out on experiencing what it means to be a human being and to actually work through the suffering and the pain. We're going to rely on a tablet or a drug to do that inner work for us. And so through my own experience, I've learned that, we can overcome, our suffering, and we can actually tap into the inner resources that are much richer than medication. But I do accept that medication is useful for people at some times. But I just really, have a strong passion in in helping people find the rich sources within, rather than going somewhere out there to find that that healing and that recovery and so forth. So
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So yeah, I also agree with you. And then there will be also a special segment in this discussion where I will discuss psychiatric drugs and controversies surrounding them. But then, of course, like psychiatric drugs are not the only modality. And of course, like in order to really have like for a strong mental resilience, we need obviously like social connection, because I think that's one thing which has been disrupted by this industrial age. And then we are social animals, social species, and then we are hardwired to need to be around our fellow human beings, because we used to be hunter gatherer. We need our brothers and sisters to protect us, right? And then although now like we already live in a much safer environment, no more predators to chase us away or whatever,
That's
but then
right.
we're still hardwired. So like we feel something's, we're gonna be depressed, and then we're gonna feel down or feel fearful when we're not around other people, right? But then when we're around other people, we typically can deal with the anxiety and fear, and then we feel less fearful. And that's one important modality. And you also talk a lot about the community in your book. But then also the other thing is that like to do the inner work, but then it's complementary, right? Like okay, we need other people, but then we cannot cling on to them or be emotionally dependent on them, but also to. But then it's interesting you say, because like even I sometimes think that listening to the inner voice can be so disruptive, disruptive, but it's not all that scary. But then you have to have the buffer, right? You
Yeah.
have to have the safety net almost, whether it's through mindfulness practices or being around
Yeah.
other people,
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
loved ones, and then only then, or being close to nature, like you said. And also, I'm lucky because I live in Bali here, so like I find going out to nature or going out to the
Mm.
mountains,
Mm.
the oceans are so healing. But then, like, you
Yeah.
need all of
Yeah.
those, and then I believe, I
Yeah.
don't know, this is personal bias, but I believe that the social connection bit is the most important thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah. So now I want to ask you also about the idea of resilience and restoration, right? Because you mentioned those
Yeah.
words frequently in your book. And then in this day and age where everything is out of whack, and then
Yeah.
wonder we are anxious and fearful and depressed all the
Mm.
time, right? Because of also, you also mentioned the bigger picture, the unjust economic system, the environmental destruction.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So with that, keeping that context in mind, how do you think we can build our resilience and to restore ourselves and to still retain the faith that, yeah, because we were talking about the grief and the losses, and it's not
Yeah.
always a death, like as you mentioned, a
Yeah.
loss of a relationship, a loss of a job, the unlived life can cause us so much grief. But and then
Mm.
of course grief is a big theme during the pandemic, of course, with people dying. And how can we
Yeah.
develop the hope and still have the faith, and so we can bounce back from these experiences?
That's a good question. I think you've made a good point about the, social connection, and I hope that that does come out in my book. And but I do probably focus quite a bit on, the self-help and the the inner self. Now I'm coming from a Western sort of nation, so I think it's going to be different for really regarding, where their home region is. And part of what I learned as I wrote the book was that how much we can learn from other cultures. So although I live in a Western culture, there's definitely things I value about other cultures. And you might sort of be the same. You might say, well, you value things about the Western culture. But importantly, we do need to have some sort of foundation of culture in our society. And some of that has been lost. Some of that has been lost in the Western nations. And cultural loss is a one of the, I suppose you could say, effects of industrialization, which I talk about in the book. So there are positive impacts of industrialization, but there are also negative, and that can contribute to lowered well-being and higher mental health issues. You were mentioning just earlier that you live in Bali, so you can actually go and be close to nature, and that actually is a something that's going to build your resilience and build your well-being. But you can imagine that there's many people around the globe that they don't necessarily have that connection with nature. They live away from nature. They live in cities, and they go to work in the city, so I think that's why there's multiple factors that can really impact on our well-being. But because my book does focus on global well-being, so it tries to, I attempt to not just talk out of my own experience, but I intentionally looked at how other people from other cultures might also be affected by industrialization. And in that way, we talk about the global community. So for example, the internet can connect us globally as it's doing now. And we can say, well, that's a good thing. That is, enriching our lives. But on the other hand, globalism can contribute to lowered well-being because, again, for the factors I mentioned earlier. So, yeah, I'm not sure if I've answered your question there, but so
but
getting
yeah,
back
it's really.
to culture,
Yeah.
and how industrialization has actually impacted culture around the world, and where cultural groups can retain their tradition and retain their connection with each other as a group, I would think they would have greater well-being. Now, I can't, I'm not an expert, so I can't say that for sure. But I found through my, just through my research and through the process of writing that, industrialization has got a lot to answer to. We need to hold it accountable. So whereas we can say, well, it's, might have increased our quality of life, we may, when I check these global poverty levels, they haven't changed much over many decades. So, and there's more people in the world, and poverty levels have not moved. They've only moved, a tiny, tiny bit. And so that's why I sort of put the challenge out there that, the Western nations who might be more prosperous on one level need to actually accept responsibility for their, for the impact they're having on other less industrialized nations. And someone needs to take accountability. Now, the big, powerful leaders at the top, they're not necessarily going to do it. And so that's why, this book, one of your questions, that's why it's calling for, you could say, grassroots wellbeing revolution, because it's not going to come from the top global powers. It's not going to come from Microsoft or, I don't know, Amazon, or, they're just names that are out at the moment. But, and I'm not knocking them because we could say they've done some good things. But, when we're really talking about, the sign of a, what would you say? When we see justice in a society, we know that that society is actually a healthy society. But when there's, a lack of justice, it's not healthy. So I think, we need some sort of regulatory system, that allows, and I don't mean a government one, we need the people power to generate this, grassroots revolution, because people do have power. And it's only by exercising that power that we will create change. So, for example, like yourself, you mentioned you go and walk in nature, and that's going to build your well-being. So, as an individual, I need to consider, my activities, my behavior, my values, a whole range of things to, to work out, what direction I'm going in, and, whether I'm exercising that personal responsibility and that to create that change needed. And sometimes it's just a slight change of awareness, and it might mean going back to more traditions, and and moving away from some of the modern lifestyles that are just unhealthy. And it's something that the individual can do, because that's in their circle of influence. It's it's and that can just bring about profound change. If you can imagine, if we did that in a small community, we looked at the circle of influence and where we can have influence, and not just be controlled by the more powerful, and not just go along with things because this is part of a system, and just be, I think, a lot more aware that what does it mean in the end? Like, what is material possessions and consumer goods, how is that contributing to our well-being? Or you know what I mean? So yeah.
It's interesting what you say, and then of course, to relate to your book, like we can only begin to change in gradually, like in small steps. And I like
Yeah.
that you advocate what you call it, not austerity, but then like fasting, but not only fasting in
Oh,
terms of dietary intake, right? But also in terms
yeah.
of our spending sprees, because like I also remember it was very ironic. I used to work and I earned a lot, but then because I was so stressful, and then again I needed to distract myself, I ended up like spending my money on consumer goods, on things that, and in the end, like they don't give us more happiness. As in my case, I should have just saved the money in terms of, for times of
Yeah.
crisis,
Yeah.
right? But then, like, secondly, they even exacerbate our sense of uh, anxiety and
Mm.
fear, because like we're repressing these
Yeah.
things
Yeah.
by buying and consuming. And I think like I think that can be like the first step that we take, like and also like austerity in terms of consuming social media.
Mm.
Yeah. But then it's really a big part of it, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And you've just made a really good point, and I'll just build on what you've just said. You said you had a good job, or you were earning good money anyway. Might not have been a good job, but you're earning good money, and you were spending the money. And that's just a good example. That's what most people are doing. But then we're not thinking about what's happening in here mentally, or even in the heart. I'll call it the heart, or the spirit, or the soul. We're just really living outwardly. We're very externally focused, and so we're missing this whole inner realm, the inner life. And we just, it's not, it's yeah, like you mentioned earlier, we're actually out of the practice, or out of the habit of being in tune, internally. And so, of course, externally, we're going to be whatever. We're going to be anxious. We're going to be possibly sick, possibly going to be poor because we're spending all that money. But we're not really going to be conscious or aware, because we've actually said, no, I'm going to dismiss that. I'm going to just put that over there in that corner, and that's just going to have to wait, because I'm refusing to give it attention, and so that's what happens. We neglect it, and then we feel even more so. We keep saying, oh, like, I should be spending time slowing down. I should be slowing down, or I should be having some quiet time or some meditation time, but you know what? I'm just too busy doing all these other things. And so that's why, the book advocates that we, start to challenge that sort of mindset. And, not everyone's religious or even wants religion, and that's fine. So it's not so much about, a religion as such, but it's, I suppose, recognizing that, we're at this time in history. So, we've got a past history as a human race, a history of, we've got wars, we've had famines before, we've had plagues before. This is not the first one. So trying to assess humanity, what direction we're going in. And, we need some individuals, I think, to stop and say, well, you know what? I don't know if I want to go that way, the way of consumerism or the way of materialism or war, I don't want to go that way. So we have to ask, well, what way do we want to go? Do we do we care about the environment? Do we care about the future? Or do we just really care about sustaining ourselves, which is very, very temporary? Yeah, so I suppose I put that down to that, at least the Western way of going is to put aside that sort of spiritual, internal practice and just say, well, no, I don't need it now because I've got all these other things. I've got machines and I've got money. I've got, enjoyment. I don't
Or
need
like
to
a
do,
build a false image on Instagram, like a false glamorous image. Anyway, yeah. Yeah. Oh, by the way, like it's interesting you say like about religion. Of course, like we can be spiritual without being religious, right? Because like
yeah,
spirituality, I think it's a matter of reconnecting to ourselves, reconnecting to other people, and of course reconnecting to nature and the other species. And then of course, like there are lots of people who are spiritual without necessarily having to be religious. And I know like the religious institutions are nothing but instruments of power, right? And yeah, actually like it's not all bad. I mean, I've been seeing like lots of
yeah.
spiritual communities growing also.
Mm, mm,
Mm,
yeah. And
yeah.
you've made a good point about religion and spirituality is that, when I talk about this inner wisdom, yeah, the inner wisdom is I suppose you could say separate from, external religion. I hope I can be heard here.
Yeah, I can still hear you. Yeah.
Oh, you can. Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
I can't see you at the moment. That's okay.
Mm.
Yeah, so, earlier we talked about, culture and traditional culture, which is being minimized around the world, and it's been happening over a period of time, in favor of this sort of industrialization, which includes the medical system, in economics, whole range of things. And so spirituality again has sort of, you could say, that's become, the alternative. It's become, non-mainstream, and therefore it's, it's you could say in the shadows of the real world, which is, like we said, full of machines and money and, lights and glamour and
Power and
power
domination.
and, wealth and I don't know, so many things. I mean, you could say the pursuit of knowledge and education, and you could say all that, but I suppose if you read my book, it's pretty cynical, I suppose, generally about, like, even in education, I really sort of feel quite strongly that the education system, and one has neglected the spiritual side of things. So the children are not getting, they're not really receiving any education about the spirit. Like I have listened a lot. I've listened to some of the Dalai Lama's teachings and talks, and he actually talks about the education of the heart. And so there's schools around the world that are bringing in this, you could say, the values of ethics um, and teaching children how to regulate their emotions, because there's so much violence happening in 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 schools, even in young children. There's violence, and so they're wanting to teach children how to self-regulate their emotions so that they can grow into peaceful men, um, who and so that's a revolution in itself. But for many educational systems, they're not including that side of things in it, which sort of means it's all focused on the brain and learning, but not on the heart and the spirit and the soul. And so there's a sort of disconnect. So yeah.
We have created like people who are really intelligent but then lacking compassion and empathy. Okay, and
Yeah.
we have like 10 minutes left, and then I'm gonna
Right.
ask you my final question,
Yeah.
which is related to that, like the heart and the mind, and then like science and spirituality. Of
Yeah.
course, like we have, of course, like we live in a polarized world. So like at the same time, we see people who are beginning to reconnect with like their
Yeah.
empathy and compassion. But of course, I've known lots of science fundamentalists. Like it seems like the science has replaced religion in that sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the science fundamentalists, and then of course, like it's also tied to how the psychiatric drug manufacturers lobby the
Mm.
policymakers in America, and also the American Psychiatric Association, and also the National Institution of Mental Health. Of course, I only know about what's going on in the US, but then based on what I know, uh, obviously, like these drugs are not well researched. But then,
Yeah.
unfortunately, still they're still championed because of the lobbying. But then also because of people have become science fundamentalists in a sense. And okay, this is my final
Yeah.
question. There are some people who regard the holistic approach as a namby-pamby, and then of course,
Oh,
I
yeah.
also had a friend, like he's maybe like a science fundamentalist, and then like I think I forwarded something like an event or like a talk to him regarding like holistic health approach and then
Mm.
living back to nature, blah blah blah. And then like his response was, "Oh yeah, nice. I can smell like the fresh bullshit here." So like it's very sarcastic, right? So
Yeah.
how would you respond to these people? And then is it true that the holistic approach is nothing more than just namby-pamby or like for
Oh,
sissies? Yeah, my final
yeah.
question
Look,
is that.
I think that is such a good question, and it would be great to see an actual open conversation and debate about this in the media, and getting resources out there to show people you know that they have other choices. There are other modalities of treatments that can be effective. So your point about the science based medicine, you could say, has sort of reached, you could say, a majority rule. And so they have most of the authority, and the um, and they don't include things like homeopathy in that science-based medicine, and that's partly why I include it in the book, because I want to just, give it the standing that it deserves. It should be sitting alongside mainstream medicine. And I was interested to read that in places like India, but also other countries, that they have used homeopathy for many years, and they are using it now within the current pandemic, whereas the Western science wants to shut it down, and that's something that I'm really, really supporting at the moment is, or at least I'm aware of there's a debate in the media as we speak about the use of these, homeopathic medicines, which, could be really helping people around the world if they were made available. But there are some issues with the powers that make the decisions are, you could say, cutting that off from the population and not giving them that choice. Now, I don't know what India is doing, but so this is a critical moment in history. There's a global crisis, and here these, what you refer to as fundamentalist, is a good point, but I would just call it mainstream medicine, is not allowing the use of these, not just homeopathic, but these other well-known effective treatments. They're not allowing them to be used, and they are, I believe, doing a disservice to the global population. And that's where I see the that's the fight. The fight is to make these medicines and treatments available to people, because, and we need to find ways to do that, to you could say, resist the authorities, and and make them available. And I think, I'm not sure how to do that, but I do know that science does have a lot of authority, but it needs accountability. And if medicine and science and governments are going to work together, well, then they need to have accountability to the people. And maybe it's time that the people rise up in their own power and demand that accountability, because as we mentioned earlier, there is, when people come together, they create power. And as we've seen in history, one individual who takes a stand can alter history. They can change history. But to sustain that, you could say, that revolution, you need people. You do need a people revolution. That's why the book is called The Wellbeing Revolution. It needs individuals to sort of come together and advocate for themselves, and maybe turn away from this, you could say, medicalized sort of society, and towards a people-centered society, where we'll see a well-being revolution.
Okay, thank you very much. We only have 5 minutes left. It's a really interesting discussion, and I do hope that with this book, and then of course, like, not articulated just by by you, but by so many other writers and journalists. We
Yeah,
can
yeah.
start conversations about this and
Mm.
initiate like small changes, which will hopefully get to a critical mass to turn
Yeah,
things
yeah.
around. So, okay, I'm gonna close now. So, thank
Yep.
you.
Thank
Uh,
you.
Thank you for supporting the Yayasan Mudra Swarisa Waraswati Patrons Program and to the festival's partners who made the Ubud Writers and Readers Festival possible. So don't forget to follow at at Ubud Writers Festival on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, or visit ubudwritersfestival.com for more information about the program. And Stephanie, thank you very much for being with us today. And also thank you to the audience, and stay tuned for our upcoming programs. We will still have many exciting discussions till October 17th. So, see you again soon. Bye.
Thank you.